Mark, you've been building Potlikker Capital. You were just about to tell a little bit of your origin story of how you got here to Potlikker and what you're doing now at this market making ecosystem building role.
Yeah, thank you, Felipe, for the prompt. I'm so excited about where those of us who call ourselves impact investors are today. Like, we spent the last 30 years investing in like bib lettuce farms and solar farms and testing, like, do we get our money back? At what rates do we get our money back? And how do we do less harm? And so that's been exciting. We have a multi-billion-dollar SRI industry that was really instigated by the religious community, that was leading with their values. And look at what it created. Just, a wonderful bedrock. But we need to go further. And where we are today is, although we've made all these investments, we still have the ravages of poverty, racism, genderism, and climate change. And they're actually accelerating in some parts of the world, including in the US. And so I feel like we're being all, including myself, who was a traditional financial person for half of the 30 plus years I've been in finance, need to step up our game and lead again with our values. And that means not just deploying capital and seeing whether we get our money back, but using capital to redefine the sandbox that the entrepreneurs and social justice people get to play in. And that means affecting all the stakeholders, like, where do we sell our goods? Who do we purchase them from? How do we process them? How are they grown? And that really was the genesis of Potlikker Capital, which is, it's not enough to give a BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, person of color farmer another loan at 2% and get the money back and claim success. It's that you help maintain and build an asset in a rural community that has lived subjugated under racism for decades. There used to be 1 million Black farmers. There are less than 45,000 today. All small farmers are under attack. But what we need to do is rebuild the resiliency of our food system, their communities, and their own farm by giving them the knowledge to climate-friendly farming practices, helping them stay connected and not operate in competition. So supporting the idea of cooperatives being reformed again around demand aggregation or processing for meat or rice processing, which we were in the process together with Jubilee thinking about, or finding ways for traditional distributors who are interested in both connecting urban markets to rural markets by having a way for them to access at higher margins direct to farmer, so that you're not having the farmers carry all the load of climate, racism, economic uncertainty, and all the tribulations and trials that happen with just farming, period. Why does the entity that has the least ability to absorb all that, why do they absorb all the risks and we get our money back at X% and feel good about that? We have to do more than that. So Potlikker is a holistic approach to that, and I'm thrilled to be working on this project now.
Mark, it's I know you're just getting underway with your efforts at Potlikker, but you have made a couple of investments. And so I'm wondering if you could tell the story of someone you've invested in or worked with where you brought this holistic approach to bear. So it's not just about, like you said, giving them a loan with certain terms that maybe are slightly more friendly, but then leaving them to continue to operate in a broken system. You're trying to do systems transformation using capital as a vehicle for that. So can you tell us a story of a farmer or someone you've worked with and made an investment in through the fund and how that holistic approach plays out?
I'm actually going to tell you 3 quick stories so you see how having a holistic lens shows up differently. Our first loan was an African-American woman in central Louisiana, very smart woman, had just 15 acres of land. And she wanted to do, basically serve as a model for regenerative farming, where pigs, chickens, non-GMO vegetables, and she used the pigs to break up the mud so that you could plant. I mean, completely self-sustained, closed loop. And her customer base was a local community, rural community in Louisiana through a CSA program. And then she also would sell her meats and drive them to Texas, because unfortunately it's the closest processor. But everything was, I mean, it's sort of the idyllic vision of what we all would like to believe our food comes from a place like this. And although she was experienced, this was a new farm. So she was very adept at getting government grants, et cetera, because of serving on boards to help other farmers. And we gave her a $50,000 loan to support her buying equipment to plant some of these vegetables, to plant us rice in a way that uses substantially less water than the traditional method, and to build hoop houses and to build a little farm stand so that people in the community could drive up and pick up their vegetables with no pesticides, no chemicals, etc. And she also wants to use this site as a learning institute for other farmers in central Louisiana who want to do the same thing on a smallholder farm base. Wonderful opportunity. Lo and behold, we gave her the loan. We gave it to her at very modest terms with flexible amortization schedule, because things happen. Like there was a huge flood, you know. It's tough to get labor. I mean, these are real things that every farmer has to deal with. But she is off to the races, has revenues now. We did follow up with an additional grant to build out electricity in that little farm stand that I talked about before. But she is going to be a mainstay. She has 20 other farmers in that community. There's a Black woman in the middle central Louisiana. And that she's a model of what we'd like to have, little examples of that can spread to change the way that we farm and serve our local community. That's one. The other two are quick. The other is a farm that is also small, about 15 acres, but it's been generationally transferred down by Black farming family for decades. And they farm traditionally. They sell watermelons, okra, peas, collard greens, and they sell only to the local community. They hire a couple people. It's a family-owned business. The gentleman farms, but loses half his crop to deer that have become much more prevalent in the community. And he uses a ton of chemicals. He's a conventional farmer. So we worked with him and said, why don't we give you grant dollars to experiment with using less chemicals and just see what that does to your soil as a farmer in Mississippi. And if that works, would you be willing to stay on the journey with us? And Jubilee Justice and Potlikker work with him together. If you stay on this journey with us, maybe we can help you with a deer fence, grant dollars that will help you be able to keep your crop and sell it to market. Maybe you can increase it by a third. That's a third of more revenues that you didn't have. And maybe we can give you a loan at some very modest rate, since it's just a family farm, that you can harvest your collard greens that you're known for in a third of the time, because you, your wife, and your son actually do it yourselves. And maybe your farm, which right now is not sustainable, you have to use off-farm income, which makes it questionable whether you're able to transfer this to your kids.
Right.
Maybe now that you're able to have revenues a third higher and harvest more quickly, that your farm will be financially sustainable and you'll keep on this journey of climate-friendly, less chemicals. But now you have a farm that you can pass on to your grandkids or your kids, and it will be sustainable, and it'll actually be helping us from a climate perspective and still serve the community. That's another example. Holistic training, grants, a loan coming down the pathway, and what a delight to work with. And he will be a focal point for other farmers in that Mississippi community to gather and talk and discuss what happened with them. We want to do that around the country with BIPOC farmers.
Mark, that's incredible. And I love how those stories bring to life the blended use of capital, the kind of hands-on technical assistance, the appreciation for the role each of these people play in an ecosystem of food and farming within their communities. Could you talk a little bit about how you arrive at how Potlikker is structured to arrive at the decisions to make these investments? I know you had nodded previously to kind of direct community engagement and participation in your decision making.
Now that's for someone who is not a farmer. I always said the best thing that anybody could do would be to take the activists and take the financial people and lock them in a hotel ballroom and throw away the key and see what comes out.
Love it.
And that really is a backdrop of how we decided to put the governance together for Potlikker, where we had the majority of both the board and the investment committee are folks who actually live in the communities, who are beneficiaries of the work that we're trying to do. So they're farmers. And I just had a wonderful conversation with an investment committee person. I'll give you an example where we provided a grant and we asked for a picture of what was going to be paid for within 3 months. And the person balked and said, do you realize that whether the fact that they can't find somebody to actually build it because prices are going sky high in construction. There are many variables that can happen where they would be in breach of you just making that one decision as a finance person to do it in 3 months versus 6 or 9 or whatever it is to give them latitude. Like you've actually increased the pressure on them. It's not that they don't want to do it, but they have a whole lot of variables to contend with. So having that kind of knowledge on the investment committee or on the board where someone says to somebody who's worked on Wall Street or worked at a bank, like what you're doing is not preparing, it's actually creating more stress, and it has capital with strings tied that are needlessly there. So we're able to adapt using that. I'll give you another example. Our communities that we want to work with are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And even within that group, there are different cultural traditions. And Indigenous communities, often collateral is, you can't use community assets for collateral. So we have to come up with ways to support loans that don't encumber community assets and still give them the loan. So those are things that bubble up just because you have farmers who can inform us of how to do this right. And it's been a better education than I had in business school, I will tell you that, to have someone yell at me and we adapt and we're doing a good job. We'll do a better job over time.
Yeah, Mark, this is so rich. I'm just thinking about the conversation we just came out of where many congregations of women religious nuns, Dominicans, Franciscans, others are have built climate solutions funds, have built kind of people on the move funds, but they're now wrestling with harder questions like you're talking about in terms of repair with Indigenous communities, in terms of some of them have made some private equity investments with employee leverage buyouts to kind of convert existing businesses so the workers have an opportunity to build wealth alongside the business's growth. And we're seeing a lot of interest in that. But you've spent, like you said, 30 years in impact investing. You've seen the field be changed and transformed. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your work at Boston Impact Initiative and how that shapes some of the conventional approaches to impact investing and how people can differentiate between the kind that you're proposing now, which takes this more holistic integrator role that sees all the different parts and tries to help see where you can kind of service where other people are servicing other people's constraints. You mentioned in credit, other things. How can we work together? Because our folks are in the process of trying to see how they can work together, and they want to have circles to integrate the capital from a much larger asset steward who has diligence capacity and can like write the memo with a person that has very flexible capital that can give it or donate or grant it in many different ways. And they want to have venture philanthropy here. And so we have a lot of different interesting people building trust with each other and getting clear on this kind of work. But tell us a little about your experience and how that led to Potlikker and the origins of all the different parties you're bringing together in your work organizing.
Felipe, I just had this conversation at 9 o'clock last night with someone who wants to build a fund. This is something I just realized. So this is hot off the press. If anybody trying to be an investor or build a fund, it's important to separate the problem that you're trying to solve for the use from the use of the capital that you might be providing. And this is what the distinction. So if I'm trying to support, in Potlikker's case, self-determination within the food system for BIPOC farmers in rural contexts, big, problem. If I define the problem that way, it allows me a whole range of tool sets. I don't get locked into something I did 20 years ago or something that's right off the shelf. I open my mind up to what, if I'm trying to solve that problem, then what kind of capital, and I don't mean just financial, but even within financial, it's different variations. What kind of capital tools do I need to solve that problem? And whether it's Boston Impact Initiative or Potlikker or any other projects that are using blended capital, what it allows you to do is to acknowledge that there's some debt that's on society. Like the starting point is not the day that we decide we want to help Black farmers. The starting point was in 1920 something or 1865 when people didn't get 40 acres and a mule. And so they've been undergoing all this stress. And then we come in with market rate loans in 2022 and say, we're gonna solve your, like it's ignoring all that history and the requirement to make investments that needs to be repaired. Repair means absorbing some of the risk, taking that back on ourselves, those who are asset holders or knowledge holders, and giving us, while in service, which I know folks you've been talking to, that is core to their lives. You're coming in service, not trying to get a certain return back on principle. And there are parts of that solution of solving rural ag racism that can produce market rate returns, but it's not the whole solution to solving it. And so you might say to the folks that you're talking to, there's grant pools, there's recoverable grants, there's legislative actions. One of the things that we did was help craft for the state of New York, which this is actually a direct example. The state of New York used to have a $25 million one-off at the governor's line item to buy food from New York farmers and send it to food pantries in New York City. Those contracts are written such that smallholder firms are unable to even bid on those. 70% of the farmers in New York State are smallholder, less than 200 acres. So why not take the opportunity to be racially just, support smallholder farmers, improve food resiliency, connect rural with urban by setting the construct such that you write that bill so that there's a portion that it has to go to smallholder farmers, and in my perspective, Black and Indigenous farmers here in New York, who can connect them. And so we helped write some of that. Part of it went through. It is now a $50 million every year renewable line item. That's something that your investors who might invest capital, but might also have social capital, to talk to the people in their state. Like we know the food pantries, we've been helping them. And let's ask the food pantries to ask for sourcing from other types of farmers, smallholder farmers, BIPOC farmers. But that's a holistic approach to solving the big problem using different types of money and other types of capital.
I'm curious, Mark, what kinds of capital you're looking for today from investors. I know many people in this workshop are eager to find new places and will be super inspired to hear what you're working on. And what kinds of capital partners have been most helpful to you and do you think will be really critical for you over the next few years?
Well, thank you for that question. Our goal is to raise $50 million over a period of time. We're going to raise and deploy. We're not interested in raising a big fund and then rushing to find where to deploy. We want to curate using the systems approach and clusters. So we will be raising notes, selling notes. We are not doing that yet till our offering memorandum is approved to go out. But we are raising grant dollars through Common Futures, which is the old version of a new version of Bali, who's our fiscal sponsor. We can accept recoverable grants today and straight grants today, of which we can loan out and demonstrate for the investors once we are able to sell notes, the type of work that I described earlier with the 3 deals that we talked about. So we can accept grants today, recoverable grants, and then we will be selling notes, I imagine, by the end of the year or early next year, where people can expect return of capital and a very modest, like less than 2%, 2% or less. But the intention is reparations and repair. This is not a private equity investment. It is private, it's not equity. So
I mean, it has that.
That's how I would answer that.
No, that's beautiful. I think there's many folks that are interested in repair and how do we do repair with our investing. And so much of what I've begun to see is how much of that journey is a journey of our own work, especially as asset stewards. And love to ask the question about your own spiritual roots to this work and formation, or other kind of beauty, or just as you encounter the human farmers and others that you encounter and work with, what keeps inspiring you? Because this is, such difficult work given many conditions we are up against. You talked about poisonous waters earlier. I thought that was such a vivid image to me. Just what sustains you in this work, Mark?
I can tell, this is a little personal, but when you're in junior high, you have to take the entrance tests, and I took them, and I was supposed to be a minister. And this is someone who's like 10 or 11, and how they got that out. But anyway, that's what it registered. And I always, from my family and travels, I've had a chance to meet Nelson Mandela, and I've been to Zimbabwe, and in the middle of some really tough environments. And I've been keenly aware of the human condition and the sense that people need dignity and the right to sustenance, no matter who they are, where they are in the world. And I also believe in grace. So my grandmother, who gave me a Bible every birthday with my name inscribed on it, most years I didn't bother to open, but I kept those, and she's no longer with me. I felt like I was surrounded by people who were tapping me on the shoulder, reminding me of that interest test. Back when I was 10 or 11. And so what a joy it is to take the training that I've had and the access and redirect it toward providing grace to people who need it. And creating platforms and beacons. That's what Potlikker is, a beacon for BIPOC farmers to go where they don't get justice elsewhere, or for other institutions who want to learn what justice looks like. Like, we need examples. We do that in our own personal lives. This is an institutional way to do that. So this is just, I felt called to this. This was not something I actually, had a goal. It just happened. And I'm following the universe. I'm following my spiritual guides. And it's very important. It's probably the most important work I will have done in my life.
Thank you so much, Mark. Just maybe one question to build on that a little bit is just, you mentioned an epiphany you had a few years ago. And I would also, if you could just orient us to, you have a 30-year career in finance and public and corporate banking too. I think it's helpful for some of the folks that are maybe coming from more of a finance first approach to investing to understand that the tools they swim in every day, the constraints they swim in every day. But tell us some of the epiphanies that led to where you are at Potlikker today a little bit, just to help people orient to your background.
Yeah, sure. So for the audience, I have an undergraduate degree in business and finance, actually, from University of Illinois, and an MBA from University of Chicago. So I was in the belly of the beast of learning about pricing securities. I started investment firms. I worked on Wall Street. I traveled all over the world, but managed large pension funds, public funds, etc. I'm very keenly aware of the construct in which money moves today. The epiphany, believe that you're referencing, is how much of that construct is just something we made up. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's a construct. Constructs, as we all know, change over centuries. What we think is right and wrong, socially changes. So to guide all of our efforts by a construct that was generally accepted, I mean, at one point, people believe the world is flat, right? I'm wary of. I realize that the edges of that construct are adaptable, that we're required to revisit those constructs to make sure they are relevant and not doing unexpected harm. And the capital asset pricing model, which I know is super geeky for most people, but is the basis of finance, was created in the 30s by two men of European descent. And they felt that they captured all the risks in monitoring stock prices, et cetera. We now know in 2022, it didn't capture climate risk. It didn't capture social unrest risk. It didn't capture a lot of the things that are threatening our society. And yet, how do we use that formula, which you use in valuing any security, as the arbiter of how we should live our lives? So it requires a revisit. And that is the epiphany, is that we have a responsibility to revisit how we're making decisions around capital, and that we can, it was not God-given. God did not give us the capital asset pricing model. Two men made that up, Eugene Fama, Merton Miller. But he did give us brains and heart to be responsible to our other community members. And that is the charge that I'm accepting.
If people want to be in touch, Mark, should they reach out to you or some other member of your team if they want to be part of the work you're doing, whether as a grant or a recoverable grant or a note holder?
We have a website, Potlikker Capital. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what Potlikker is, it sounds like a strange word to some, but Potlikker is actually the juice that you have at the bottom of a pot when you make collard and turnip greens, the Southern delight. And the juice was a remedy often for colds and illness. So on our website, you can see a re-articulation of everything I talked about today, but also has an email where you can contact us at info@potlikkercapital.com, and a phone number, which you can reach me and other members of our staff. And then my email is mark@potlikkercapital, Mark with a K, potlikkercapital.com. And I would enjoy to have conversations on anything we discuss and things we haven't touched. But I welcome inquiries around how we can do what we do better.
Thank you so much, Mark.